Okay, good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to the latest version of the International Sleep Charity's Global Webinar Series. I'm Charlie Alton, I'm your introducer. I'm a businessman by background, and I do this because in 2009, I got diagnosed with severe obstructive sleep apnea. I got sorted out, and it was one of the major turning points in my life. Now, sleep's an important subject. So what we do with the International Sleep Charity, it's all about helping people to sleep as well as they possibly can. Last month, we had Professor Mignot from Stanford University, one of the rock stars. Great talk. He's the conqueror of narcolepsy, and he's super passionate about pure sleep research. This month, we've got a very different thing, but equally as important. We've got Professor Jan van den Bulck, and he's truly international himself. So a Belgian who studied at Hull University, sociology. It's a very social place, is Hull. And then on to Louvain University in Belgium, also on to Erasmus in Rotterdam, spent some time at Purdue, and he's now professor of media psychology at the University of Michigan. He's a researcher in epidemiology and social science, and he's particularly interested in the unintended effects of media use, particularly on sleep. So a great overlap with our cause about helping people sleep better. And really, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to the main man himself, who's going to talk about for eons we slept, and then came Facebook. Professor Jan van den Bulck, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for the introduction. Just a quick housekeeping question. Do I share my slides now?
Yes, please.
All right, there we go. Okay, well, I am guessing we have people from different time zones here. So let me start by wishing you a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and which is new when you give a talk somewhere. And you will soon find out that this is actually a perfect opening line for the talk I want to do. I started looking at media and sleep for the first time in 1999 when I wrote something about media and health. I was kind of trying to come up with a fifth topic that I could refer to. And I thought, what about sleep? And when this got published, one of the comments was, so you managed to find the most trivial topic in the world, studying television, and added something to it that's even more trivial, sleep, because at the time, most people assume like sleep is when you do nothing. So how is that even an issue? You can probably imagine that if I talk about similar topics today, very often somebody in the audience will say, it sounds as if you're talking about me, because I think today we have some kind of issue with media and sleep, whether we like watching a lot of television or whether we're probably young or spending much more time on our phones. And if you are one of these people who says, that doesn't apply to me because I take life seriously, then you may be the kind of person who's probably checking their email at 10 to midnight. So we're all struggling with it somewhat. If I look at my own first results, this is a table from the first study. And if you look at that second part of the table, this was self-reports in young people. We don't know how honest that was. We don't know how open that was. My assumption at the time was that most people wouldn't be very eager to admit that they didn't get enough sleep because of television. And so this was probably an underestimation, but it certainly shows that at least a third of the people in that early study reported some kind of issue with sleep caused, in their case, by television. And then about 10 years ago, somebody discovered that blue light was an issue, that many of the screens that we are starting to surround ourselves with emit blue light, and that suppresses melatonin, and that helps ruin your sleep. And on some level, my sense was that the sleep community thought like, fine, we have a biological explanation, we have a physiological thing, we can stop looking now. And so at that point, it sounded to me as if my job was done, or rather nobody was interested in my part of the job anymore, because we basically discovered that the media were like a lamp. And I don't agree with that. And my point today is going to try to show you why I don't agree with it and to offer you a framework to think about this. Because one of the issues we'll run into several times is that the media change incredibly fast. By the end of this year, something will have come up that we weren't aware of yet. And something will be, if you're on Facebook right now, your children probably think you're an old person. That's why you're on Facebook. That wasn't the case in the beginning. And so I always feel that it's probably more useful to think about the media from a process point of view and to think theoretically, even philosophically, as you'll notice, about the media, rather than just look at what we know at this very moment, because that changes really fast. So look again at that, at those data I shared earlier. If you don't look at the second question, but at the first one, the other one, and remember, I was just making stuff up to see whether this led anywhere, because I had no idea at the time. I didn't even know there was such a thing as sleep medicine, so I was just inventing these questions. But then you'll see that the question, did you ever have any, how often do you have difficulty falling asleep after suspending a movie, also led to a large number of people reporting issues. And that's something very different. That's not the blue light. That's something in the media that seems to have affected these kids. And that's what we'll look at today. Let me introduce it by showing you a couple of pictures and asking you to think with me. So here you see JFK campaigning for his election. And take a second and see what you notice. And here's a second picture with Bill Clinton when he was campaigning. Here's a third picture with Barack Obama. You start to notice things in this picture that weren't present in the first one. I'm talking, of course, about the photo cameras. And then here's a picture from 4 years ago when Hillary Clinton was campaigning. And this is a really interesting picture for me to introduce my talk today, because is something wrong with these people? Is something wrong with the candidate? Why does everyone have their back to her? Is there a lack of respect for politicians? Have people changed? Or is there something about the media that we're surrounded with these days that has changed the situation? And that's what we'll be focusing on. You'll see that every time media change and evolve, the first knee-jerk reaction of most of society is, this isn't good for us. And you can find amusing examples of this in online archives, where literally every new development has had us worry about the media. You know, I only have to point at 5G to make you aware of the most recent scare that we've had in that sense. All of this points to the question that I'm going to try to discuss with you is, when the media change, does society change, and is that change big enough to be of concern to us? And I'm being inspired by a political economist called Harold Innis, who worked at the University of Toronto, who looked at this. And this is my reading of it. I don't know how accurate that is if you read Innis's original work, but the way I understood it is that his idea was that when the media change, society changes. And some changes in society are only possible if the media have changed first. If you take the example of the earliest written history of humankind, when we were still writing in stone, if you had, you probably had one big stone in the middle of your community where the ruler, the leader, had the rules written down. If that's your society, because that's the media you have access to, that means you're by definition a very small society, because people have to have access to the stone to know what the rules are. It's probably a society with just one ruler, because this isn't the place where you change the rules very often. That requires too much work. And so the society is defined by, or at the very least, exemplified by the media they have. And if you then go to the Romans, who have easier ways of writing on parchment or on clay tablets, now you have a system where you can develop an elite that thinks about rules and laws and changes them, because we just make a copy and everyone has access to the new rules. So now we can have a senate and we can have an empire. Because if you add Rome's excellent transportation system to this, and I mean, many theorists call that a means of communication as well, you can now have rules that are changed in Rome, copied in Rome, and sent to a place as far and backward as Britannica at the time, or the very sophisticated cities in the north of Africa, and everyone has access to the same rules. So our society changes. Another big jump would be when we invented the printing press. When this started to emerge, what was the first thing people thought of? What is the biggest thing you may want to print once you do this technology? That's the Bible, of course. And so once you print the Bible, more people have access to the Bible. And because more people have access to the Bible, more people start to read it, more people start to think about it, more people start to have opinions about it. And so this way of thinking argues that you can't have something like Protestantism until you have the printing press, until people have access to the Bible. If you look at the history of Luther's pamphlets, there is, if you're interested in this part of the story, there's a really nice article from about 10 years ago from The Economist, and I believe there's an audio version as well, that explains how, but also how quickly Luther's ideas went viral, and what the role of the technology at the time was. And surprisingly similar to Facebook, by the way. So that's the idea of Innis. When the media change, society changes along with it. Now, most of the questions we have actually go further, and that's the question: when the media change, does it change human nature? Does it change us as people? There's another person from the University of Toronto who's thought a lot about that. This is a name you may have heard of before, called Marshall McLuhan, who became famous for the concept of the medium is the message. And that was the idea that there's something in new media that changes not just the world, but the way we interact with it. And so in the end, it ends up changing us. I'm going to show you a few cliches to support this, although that's not a very academic way of trying to make an argument. But if we think of the traditional view we have of childhood, I had this in the back of my mind when about 10 years ago, I noticed my son and his cousins. I thought, I have to make a picture of this situation. This is so different from how we used to perceive childhood. This is even several years ago, but this is children now. They're all on their own media. And that's what being together seems to mean right now. So has that changed us as humans? Are we connected in a different way? Are we connected less? Are we more lonely? Do we have certain other problems that emerge because of this new technology? Those are typical questions that a McLuhanesque way of looking at society would lead to. I like to show this picture when we talk about something like that, because that rosy picture I painted of childhood before we were ruined by the media, that's actually a picture of a very recent childhood. I mean, being a child used to mean something very different. So you have to put the right perspective. And I think one of the dangers of any theory that pretends to go through history, and I've just gone through at least 2,000 or more years of history with you, is that that's a kind of cherry picking that allows you to prove whichever point you're trying to make. I mentioned in the introduction that I studied in the UK in the late 80s, and it took me 14 hours to go from Zeebrugge to by boat. And then I think it took me a mile to get to the nearest phone booth to save coins. And so I didn't use it to call my parents. That was the reality in the late 80s. Today, we all have access to mobile phones. And even though I live in the US now, I can talk with my relatives in Belgium every day and actually see them. That's a whole new world. Does that change us as human beings? There are some who think it does. And I don't know whether you're familiar with the concept of nomophobia. That's the fear of being without your phone. If I say this in front of an audience, I can actually hear this usually leads to a few giggles. So I don't know whether you're giggling at home right now. But if you think about it, I'm fairly sure that many of you are acutely aware of your battery right now, what the percentage on your battery is. And when you leave the house, that's probably the first or the last thing you check before deciding to head out. So this really seems to be something that people are dealing with nowadays. Or look at childhood again. When I was a kid, go to your room was punishment. I'm sure that that's still ingrained in the behavior of many parents. Well, let me show you my son's room. Um, this is what happens today when we say go to your room. That's where their life is the nicest. They have access to the whole world through the internet. They can play video games or do whatever it is they like to do. We have this warning added to our wall in that particular room. So you're not punished and isolated by being sent to your room anymore. So that seems to suggest that even those little innovations in the media sometimes have led to big in how we lead our lives. Here's another typical example. There's now suggestions that there's less crime among young people. This news article claims that it's because they're too lazy, but the suggestion is young people spend so much time on media and their phones and being connected and doing stuff with social media, they no longer go out. They don't even have time to commit crimes. So what does that mean for sleep? Well, for one thing, the media have followed us into our bed right now. And we can see the evolution from a family sitting around the one radio set they had, to the one TV set they had, to TVs moving to the bedrooms, to into the house. I did a study only I don't know, it feels like not too long ago, where we used to ask, do you have access to the internet in your bedroom? When we had to pull a physical wire into that room to get that kind of connection. Today, that's an absurd question. How could you not have access to the internet bedroom? So literally from year to year, our environment seems to change, and certainly our sleeping environment seems to change. We used to worry what television did right before bedtime, but right now, as in the picture of my son here, they have their phone, and not just a phone, but a kind of amazing mini computer that has access to everything there is in the world, whether it's information or entertainment or dangers. And they have it right with them into their bed. So that's a very new situation. If you look at the combination of media, or the intersection of media and sleep, there's a couple of things you have to be aware of. When we're trying to explain how innovations have changed sleep, the simplest level is what I call structural explanations. Electricity has changed the way we lead our lives. We now have artificial light that's strong enough to extend the daylight time and to work until late at night. McLuhan actually mentions that as one of the big media that has changed our lives, and it's certainly easy to see how that changed the way we interacted with sleep. I already mentioned the physiological explanation of blue light and melatonin. Compared to not too long ago, we now literally shine a light in our face through large parts of the day. That's got to mean something. But I want to look at those media-specific factors I talked about earlier, because as I said before, I don't think the media are like a lamp. It's not just the light shining in our eyes and what that does to us physically that helps explain what the media do to sleep, and it's probably not even the biggest issue, certainly not today. So if we think about media-specific factors, the first one I'm thinking about, the first process I'm thinking about is the concept of self-control, or as it's also sometimes referred to, ego depletion. That's the idea that when we start the day, we have a certain level of self-control available to us. But every time we do something throughout the day that requires self-control, taking a deep breath when you got off the phone, when you had a really difficult conversation, or an unexpected mishap, or anything that requires your mental energy. Every time we use some of that in this way of thinking, we use it up. It's like using a muscle that gradually becomes too tired. Here's my co-author on that way of thinking, who made her own PhD about that concept, explaining it in a very physical way. The idea that every time you make that decision, you get rid of some of your self-control. And the crazy thing about it for us is, how do you get more self-control? How do you replete this? By sleeping. And so by definition, right before we go to bed, right before we sleep, that's when our self-control levels are lowest. And for most of us, that's exactly when we start to use the media. Some of us will end up watching television or Netflix. Some of us will be on their computer and be working or answering emails. It doesn't matter whether it's for entertainment or serious stuff. But at the moment in time when having control over our own lives is important and have us make the right decisions about sleep, that's when all of this is at its lowest. And so that looks like an important element in this relationship. What it means is it's harder for us to resist the pull of immediate gratification. And you have to imagine how easy that is. We'll look at that in a second. But I mean, the media, as I said, follow us into our bed. So it's really, really easy nowadays to use the media as something to procrastinate, or as something to divert your attention, or as something we sometimes do without even giving it much thought. There's a second reason why the media are more than just a lamp, and that's what I call structural factors. One of the things is the media makes sure it's really easy for us to get caught up in them. Sorry. These are two images from my own laptop. If you go on Facebook or any of the social media, there's plenty of links to click on, and it's really no effort to go from that to an entertainment program, or to something in the news, and from that to someone else who links back to it, etc. Or if you're on something like Netflix, you get about 5 seconds to decide whether you want to see the next episode. And imagine, if this is late at night, your level of self-control is at its lowest. That doesn't give you a lot of remaining power to say, I really like this. That's why I just spent an hour watching the previous episode. I'm really wondering what's going to happen next, but I should go to bed. Just saying it probably takes longer than 5 seconds. So it's really hard to pull us away from those distractions. A second element of the structural factors is what I call pull factors. There is also, it's not just how easy it is to get into these things. There's a constant bombardment with cues that tell us, hey, check out your media. If you have a new phone, you spend the first month trying to figure out how to get rid of all the notifications, and then still something will come in saying, breaking news, click on this link immediately and find out what's going on. Or someone has sent you a message on one of the social media, surely you want to know immediately what it is and who it's from. So those are the pull factors that keep pulling us towards those media. That's why that phone is so hard for us, I think, because even those of us who think like, no, I've decided to go to bed. You go to your bathroom to get ready for bed. And then what do most of us do is we give a quick look at our phone. And in our minds, that's just like 1 or 2 seconds. But if we see one of these pull factors, one of these cues, that 1 or 2 seconds can get You can get sucked up into an email that upsets you, or one of the rabbit holes on the social media where you keep clicking until, well, you never click until nothing's there anymore, because there's always something. So it's really difficult for us to stay away from those cues and to resist them. And then there's a third thing I don't often hear mentioned, and that's interaction. One of the weirdest things about the media is, especially social media, and even more so now that we use our phones for it, is it's not just us versus the media. It's hard enough to pull away from television when you're binge viewing. But with social media in particular, and the stuff happening on our phones more generally, we're also influenced by other people. In kids today, in particular, there is a lot of pressure for them to keep liking each other's stuff, and a lot of at least perceived punishment if they don't do it. I'm reminded of the daughter of a friend of mine who flew from the Midwest to England, and by the time she got there, because she'd been on the plane so long, she'd lost a lot of friends, because apparently the unwritten rule in her group of peers was, when we post something, you get about 3 or 4 hours to like it. If you haven't liked it by then, we don't like you anymore. That's a lot of pressure. That's pressure from other people to stay engaged with the media. And that's something that's very often lost in research on media and sleep, because we're always looking at what's wrong with this person. Why is this person watching so much television? When we're thinking about interactive media, very often that person's part of a network, and it's the whole network to explain what's going on. And interaction has a second side to it that we literally choose to ignore much of the time. And that's what I've called socialization here. It's the role of the parents. There's a lot of research from even the early days of studying children and media that show that the climate in a family, whether you have an authoritarian parenting style or a more cooperative parenting style, all of that plays a big role in modeling your children's media use. And if we look at media today in particular, it's hard to blame your children, for instance, for doing something if they see you do the same thing at the dinner table all the time. This one is even more upsetting in many ways. It's hard enough to be awake with a baby all the time. So people turn to their phone as a distraction. Well, one of the things we'll have to start worrying about or thinking about is, does this change the interaction between this child and the caretaker, the caregiver, and does that have any developmental outcome that the child is raised? These are fairly fundamental questions about media and sleep in this case, where it's not the individual, but the group it belongs to, the smaller or the bigger group it belongs to. What does this mean for sleep research? One general thing I would like to say to people who are on this webinar is, you usually come to this topic from personal perspective. If you're a researcher, you probably start as a media researcher or as a sleep researcher. If you're someone who's concerned, you may be into sleep medicine, or you may be a therapist or a parent, a concerned parent. Usually it means that people have the tendency to think that they're the first to think of this. And my first advice would be aware that sleep medicine is a large field. Effects research is a large field, so don't reinvent the wheel. I feel that I'm allowed to say that because that's exactly what I did. I had no idea that sleep medicine was an actual field and that so much had been done there. So I had to catch up really, really quick. But that's something we often see. And The second thing I wanted to say, and I have to take a quick look to see what the order of my slides is here. Okay. The second thing I wanted to say is that we have to be extremely aware of the rapid changes in the media. And Lisa Exelmans and myself have argued once that really sleep and media research should have a sell-by date. It's incredibly important to be aware of when was this study done, because in a year's time, things change. And I already mentioned TikTok. That's a perfect example of something most adults weren't aware of a year ago, probably. And because of recent political developments, we've now all heard of it. This is a typical example. Okay, applied to media and sleep. Most of the research until recently has looked at sleep displacement as a result of media use. So that's the idea that we have to worry about media because they make us go to bed later. And if you don't sleep long, it means you lose sleep. That's often referred to as sleep displacement. There's a second layer, which is referred to here as sleep latency. I mean, if you've been watching a movie that's very scary, or you've had that email that upsets you, you may be awake longer because you have trouble shutting down your brain. That would keep you awake longer once you're in bed, and that would lead to sleep latency. We've argued, however, that that's actually not the biggest concern anymore. There are now at least two levels of sleep displacement, if we want to use the old terminology, because we take the media into bed with us. Old people who are not very sophisticated among us might be watching television from their bed, and they may have a traditional TV somewhere in their bedroom. The younger people are more likely to have their phone or a laptop with them. And so the question is no longer just what are the media doing to us right before bed. It even includes what are you doing to us in bed. And only then can we start thinking about what do they do to us in bed once we've shut them off. Because shutting them off isn't limited to the period right before bed. So that's a very fundamental change that has taken place. And that's why we've argued that we have to have a certain historical awareness when we're doing these studies. And so we've introduced the concept of shut-eye latency to refer to that. Because if you look at some of even the clinical measures out there, sometimes it's something like, okay, what time do you go to bed? How long before you sleep? If that's more than 30 minutes, you have a sleep issue. That may no longer be a productive way of thinking about this. I remember a person back in Belgium who told me, like, now he had an iPad. He went to bed half an hour earlier, watched one episode of his favorite program, then switched off the iPad and the light, turned around and slept. So no sleep latency. The moment this man decided, I want to sleep, he basically fell asleep. But if you would use the traditional way of measuring this, you would end up with somebody who spent more than half an hour awake between bedtime and actually shutting his eyes and sleeping. So the media force us to rethink how we define some of our most fundamental concepts. So here's I think I misspoke earlier when I said something about TikTok. I probably only plan to say it right now, but this is a slide from a year ago when I was talking about the media. And when I talk about media in front of adults, I used to add a couple of things that, assuming most people would not have heard of it. TikTok used to be one of them. And so I realize that probably for most of us right now, that's no longer an issue. But you can still try to go reach out to your younger family members and ask them about Finstagram. If you've not heard of Finstagram, then at least that still works for me as an example. Finstagram is, those of us who have Instagram, many teens today also have a fake Instagram account, which is sometimes referred to as Finstagram. It's on the same Instagram, but this is an account that's not very public, so only few people have access to it. And that's because this generation has changed to such an extent that they're permanently aware of the possibility of being photographed by someone. And so they have an Instagram account that's supposed to be perfect, where they think about their pose and what they're wearing and how they're looking at the camera. That's an exhausting life. And so many of them have another Instagram account that to an adult is hard to understand because it's photos that aren't nice. Here's one of my kids showing me what a Instagram photo ought to look like. And the interesting thing is, this is me trying to do the same thing. When I do it, it's because I'm an old guy who doesn't know how to use the media. So this is really something that children have defined as this is our world, and old people don't belong there. If you know about Instagram, maybe you don't know about mukbang videos. Do you know what mukbang videos are? This is a craze where people make YouTube videos where they eat large amounts of food that doesn't look particularly healthy, and that's it. Huge followings. Maybe you haven't heard of unboxing yet, or rainbow slime. Rainbow slime is a big craze on YouTube, as I unboxing. Unboxing is simply you buy something and then you make a video of you opening the box you've just ordered. And people want to see you do this. Looking at all these developments where sometimes we think like, this is so alien to us, this is so hard to understand, why are people acting crazy, why aren't they reading a book instead? The most helpful theory, I think, to think about this is something called uses and gratifications theory. It's one of the founding people behind it was Elihu Katz, who's currently at UPenn. It's the idea that we expose ourselves to the media for a reason. They give us something. Here's a study that looks at mobile phone use, and there's a lot of reasons that people list why we read a newspaper, or we used to read a newspaper because we like to feel informed. We like to be the kind of person who thinks, I know what's going on in politics. That's a needs-based perspective on media use. When you look at mobile phones, which is the vehicle, especially children use more and more as the main way to use any kind of media. One of the most important reasons for that is relationship maintenance. And I bring this up because of what I mentioned in the beginning, when people thought that studying media is a trivial domain because the media are trivial. Well, even if what your children or you do on the media appears to be trivial, if one of the reasons you do it is relationship maintenance, that isn't trivial. And I think we've never understood that better than right now during the COVID crisis, when it's really hard to stay connected to people, and where showing a sign of life is important. It's less important what somebody puts on a WhatsApp post or puts below your Instagram picture. It's more important to have had that connection. That's why likes have such a big influence on teenage lives. It's not because of the content, it's because of the signal that they're still connected and that they're still part of an existing group. What this means, and this is me starting to wrap up, what this means is, if we think about our own lives, our own media use and sleep, but also if we talk to other people about this and how we worry about other people about this, we have to rethink how we do this and become a little bit more aware of what's so special about media. This is one of the crazy examples you will find everywhere. I think, well, it's very common to say no media 2 hours before bedtime. That's a very common advice you hear nowadays. First of all, I think that that's very, very hard. Whether you're a child working for school and trying to get uh, some leisure time, or whether you're an adult struggling with work, or again, maybe a hobby or leisure time, 2 hours before bedtime, that's an amazing effort to ask of people. But here's the crazier thing in the example that I'm showing you. This, take a look at this. We just say stuff. It's easy to say. I remember an obesity conference where somebody was going through a list of recommendations on how to deal with obesity, sorry. And at some point he said, "Oh, and for good measure, don't watch too much television," with no basis in reality or in empirical research, just because that sounded okay. This is a little bit the same thing. We just say this without thinking about how would that work. You're having kids do homework on a laptop, and then at the same time they shouldn't be on a laptop. Um, 2 hours before bedtime, what are we even supposed to do that long? But the crazy thing is that, or what shows how superficial some of this is this next line that I indicate here, where the next thing is, oh, by the way, we have an app for that. You can use your phone and get help from us with that. Other than that, I think it's important to be aware of your media use and how it interacts with your sleep. And the extreme idea of you should not be watching television, and if you don't watch television, there's no risk of binge watching. That's not very realistic. It may work for a few of us, but most of us literally get something out of those media. That's why I refer to the uses and gratifications theory and the phenomenon that we use the media because we have certain needs that the media uh, gratify. But you can help yourself. Most of these streaming video services like Netflix, you can switch off the option that it automatically goes to the next episode, and you can have yourself be asked. And what that means is you don't have to change anything in your life. All you do is take back control and agency. So if you want to watch 4 episodes of something, that's fine. You're still free to do that. Nobody's telling you you shouldn't. That doesn't work anyway, probably. But at least now you don't have 5 seconds to make the decision. And that gives you a little bit more time to think, I want to see this, but it's probably better for me if I go to bed now. Similarly, and I wish I remembered one of, I don't remember who actually said this in an interview. It's a sleep researcher who was talking about a study that wasn't necessarily immediately related to this. One of the reasons why the media works so well is because they have their own logic. The logic is tied to deep-seated and automatic responses in us. We're wired to want to be entertained, and we are, Hollywood is very good at telling the stories we want to hear. But it's also important to know these are professional ways of dealing with us. I see my internet connection is unstable. Okay, message gone. So if we become aware of how the media work and what the media do to us and with us, we can start to use that. And you all know what a cliffhanger is. And this is a shot from Game of Thrones, where at the end of an episode, one of many people's favorite characters may or may not have just been killed. Well, you'd have to be strange not to want to watch the next episode after that. And if it's available because of the streaming service you're using, and you get 5 seconds to make up your mind, of course you're going to watch it. Not because something's wrong with you, because you have no control over your urges, but because they are made to make you want this. Well, the same applies in the opposite direction, because nobody in the media has enough money to keep us hooked the entire time. And so you'll often see that somewhere in the middle of an episode, that's a slightly more boring part. Maybe somebody is traveling by horse somewhere. That's a good time to stop and to continue watching the next day. I think many of us have been raised, and I'm certainly like that, where you think, like, if you start something, you have to finish it. There's no law saying you have to watch 1 episode at a time, or you have to watch until the end of the episode, or you have to go through the entire Facebook updates that someone has posted. You are free to choose how you deal with the media. And so it's okay to stop in the middle of something. It's okay to tell yourself, I'm only going to allow myself to check Facebook until noon or whatever. So as soon as we realize how the media operate and what they do to us and how we respond to that, we can start tweaking our own behavior and our own responses to that. So my big message is, if you're thinking about the media, for whichever reason it is, either because you're helping someone or you're trying to help yourself or try to be more aware of yourself, you have to think like a cultural anthropologist. You're trying to understand an alien culture, something where you're not sure whether the rules are the same as the ones that you assume to be universal. You're thinking about your kids. They will be doing different things with the media than what you grew up using them for. If you're thinking about other same thing, if you're thinking about yourself, there may be a lot of stuff below the surface, subconscious stuff going on. So become aware of that and look at it as something strange that you have to analyze, and not as something we just happen to have lying around when we have a couple of hours to fill. Thank you. I'm open for questions.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Professor van der Bulck, for taking the time today to give a stimulating talk. So your ideas were extremely thought-provoking, especially how technology is ruining sleep, but also how the human self-control is being targeted specifically. And recent documentaries, such as The Social Dilemma, completely neglected this discussion. So hopefully we can all leave today and help fuel that discussion further, but also to get involved in the research to help further investigate the link between how technology is affecting sleep. So before we continue with the Q&A, can you please stop sharing your screen?
Of course.
Thank you.
Stop share, there we go.
Amazing, right. There we go. So we have a few questions and, oh, bear with me, sorry. There we go. Can we see that, or?
Yes, I can see it.
There we go, sorry.
No, I can't.
I'll go back to that. There we go. Can you see that?
Address those?
Yes, if you could start with the first question, please.
Okay. Well, the first one, one of the interesting things I think about, there was a time when we first became aware of this, when we thought the media or the internet, and you get research saying how much time do you spend on the internet. I think with this question, the question is more intelligent than going to. Oops. Am I back?
Yes. I think
I'm sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine. Can you still see the?
So I was saying that I think we have to become more aware of what individual types of media use do. If you watch The Simpsons because it relaxes you right before bed, that's probably going to be good for you. If you watch something that horrifies you, or something on the news makes you really upset, that's probably going to be bad for you. And so this is exactly the kind of questions I think we ought to be asking. What does Facebook do? Is Instagram something else? Is it the kind of views? What if you put something on Facebook and you thought you were going to be very funny and cute, and then people start to act, 100 people denounce you because they don't like the way you said it. That's going to affect, because you're using social media. It's because of which type of social media and what it is you're doing with it and what it is doing to you. I know that's a very general answer, but that's exactly the sort of questions we should have more of. Right. I saw a question in the chat. Do you like me to answer that one, or? I'll continue with the ones on the screen first. I don't hear you.
Yeah, so if you could read that out loud, because I won't be able to put it onto the slide at the moment.
I'll go to the chat question. So that the last question that came in, what is current? Oh no, sorry, wait. I think I messed something up. Okay, sorry. I'll just read the questions from the screen. I think I misunderstood.
That's fine.
So do I think the growing influencer careers encourages more people to engage with social media? I think yes, especially young people. And we come from an era when some of us had to get used to reality TV and the weird phenomenon of seeing people do stuff on television, where many of us thought, like, I would never do that. One of the first things I did in my career was have students talk to people who went on those kinds of reality shows. And the remarkable thing is, their main complaint was, I didn't get enough airtime. So apparently we had developed a group of people thinking, my life is horrible, but if I could win the lottery, in other words, if I can get my face on television, I'm going to be a different person. I think right now the influencer wave is the same thing. And certainly young people have the impression that if you look right and behave right and you're lucky and careful, you can. It's sometimes told as a joke, but I don't think it is a joke. The idea that if you used to ask kids, what do you want to become? They'd say astronaut, and now they'll say social influencer. So that is certainly a real thing right now, I think. It's something to be aware of. As adults, we often have an underestimation of what's out there because we think in terms of very traditional media use, and traditional includes television, something like television. If you go from one crazy prank on YouTube to another one for an hour, you spend a lot of time with the media and a very particular message from the media that has nothing to do with the traditional ways of storytelling and information processing that we know from earlier eras. Okay, third question. What is current society view of sleep, and how do we get people more excited about it? I like that question because it's interesting in my view to see how I think sleep has been getting more media attention. If you compare it to 10 years ago, sleep wasn't really a point of discussion. And now we see more of it. You see news reports about it. People worry about sleep more. And the problem with that is that if you think of what we've been talking about, that the media have their own structure and their own rules, their own way of doing things, we have to be aware that if we as a sleep research community put stuff out there, the media have their own rules. Their rules aren't to report every boring study and talk about how small the correlations are. Their way of working is, what is exciting about this? Why would we care? And then you get all the, I usually joke that if you worry about whether something you do causes cancer, wait a week and it will be the opposite, because that's going to be the next big news story. Sleep isn't that far yet, but if you look at the extent to which news is used to titillate us and to make us excited about the topic, you see that it focuses on the extremes and the extreme things. So this is a really dangerous phenomenon, in a sense, where we as people who care about sleep and health aren't always equipped to deal with communication and media the right way. I saw a discussion about COVID where some of the epidemiologists on Twitter started to say we should think more about how we communicate, and I think that that's exactly it. There's a lot of knowledge about this. I mean, the early studies on convincing young people to stop smoking. There's an idea that if we're the experts on health, we know that smoking is bad for you. We're just going to tell you, and once you know, you should change your behavior. Well, we all know that that's not how it works. People are good at resisting pressure. When people think that there is an alternative motive that helps them resist that kind of pressure. So communicating about health is a difficult job, and one that has to be done very carefully. Another very vague answer, I realize.
Were there any other questions on the chat, Professor Van den Bulck, that you can see? And also, just to clarify, no, the answers were amazing. Because I can't see the chat myself.
Oh, yeah, because I was briefly shut out. I don't see it anymore either. Oh, wait. No, those were the questions, I believe.
Amazing. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we do wrap things up?
I don't know how late it is for everyone, so it's probably too early to say do something clever now as a result of this. But well, you know, I was thinking when I was writing this, until recently when I did a PowerPoint presentation, I had started to learn, you know what, these projectors are so good nowadays. You can actually make the font smaller. You can put more on a slide. Now we're retooling everything because we know we see it on somebody else's, maybe their phones even. This is just another example of what we've been talking about, how tiny changes in media and in society interact and change everything. I hope I had a friend from the Netherlands who used to start his talks with something, and I'll end with that. He used to say, like, my job today is to talk to you, and your job today is to listen to me. And if you finish your job before I finish mine, please let me know. So I hope I didn't lull anyone into sleep. I did see one more. Okay, there's another question. What about using electronic devices right before you wake up in the morning while still being in bed? Would be a different type of latency? That's a good question. It's actually a slide I had, and I got rid of it to shorten my talk a little bit, but that's absolutely a valid point, I think. When we started to worry about this, is this something that's going to push back our sleep? And this is going to influence us at the beginning of sleep. And most people nowadays use their phone as an alarm. So literally the first thing they take when they get up is their phone. And it must be a growing number of spend time in bed scrolling to their emails or Facebook updates or the news even before they get out of bed. That must be a different way of getting up. That's certainly something we need to study more. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's at risk of doing that. And I'm guessing that whoever asked this question also knows very well what they're talking about.
Amazing. I think that's all we have time for today then. Just to wrap things up, well, again, thank you so much for your time. But just to notify everyone listening, our next event will be a book club session with Professor Russell Foster. So again, if you could sign up through our website at the internationalsleepcharity.org, but also just another notice. So Many people on our team, we're currently undertaking some research ourselves. So if you would like to get on board and also just get involved with the charity in general, please do visit the website again. And there should be a place that you can apply to the charity essentially and help us fuel our research as well. So I think Professor Van den Bulck just lagged out, but anyway, thank you again so much everyone for your time, and do attend our next session. Thank you.